to introduce to you Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Hello, good to meet you.
Well, let me begin. Can you all hear me? Is this loud enough? Let me begin by congratulating you all for being a voice for the voiceless, spokespeople for those who are often on the margins of society. And I deeply applaud you because we have a government today in Washington that cares endlessly about the needs of the wealthy and the powerful, but kind of forgets about those people who are in pain and who are hurting. So I want to congratulate you for what you do. I also want to say a word, and I'm sure others have commented on it as well, that your former Senator Tom Harkin has been an extraordinary leader on the whole issue of disability rights. In fact, Tom, I think more than any other person in recent history, has fought to bring disability issues into the light and has helped pass the ADA and the IDEA and other legislation which finally gave rights to the disabled. Before the passage of the ADA, kids with disabilities, as you know, were often institutionalized. They were hidden. I can remember that as a kid. People were embarrassed. Parents were embarrassed that they had kids with disabilities, kind of hid those children from the public. That has changed, and that is because of the work you and Tom Harkin and many others have done. Instead of being stigmatized, our kids now have the opportunity to go to public schools, and my experience in Vermont has been that time after time, these kids are brought in to the love and the concern of the overall school. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. It's great for the kids with the disabilities, and it's great for the kids who do not have disabilities. And that's what we should be doing all over this country. While we have made enormous progress over the past 30 years, clearly a lot more needs to be done. And what our campaign is about is to fundamentally change priorities in America. To tell the wealthy and powerful that yes, they're going to have to pay more taxes so we can address the needs of working families, address the needs of people with disability, address the needs of people who tonight are sleeping out on the street. We have got to expand and not cut educational opportunities by fully funding IDEA and vocational education programs for Americans with disabilities. And that's why I'm proud that the educational plan I have presented would increase funding for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act by over $32 billion each and every year. That would be the largest increase that has ever been seen. Furthermore, my Housing for All plan would provide the resources necessary to build 10 million units of low-income and affordable housing, and every one of those housing units would be accessible to all Americans. Furthermore, I happen to believe that health care is a human right, not a privilege. And that means we've got to join every other major country on earth and guarantee health care to all of our people as a right, and we can do that and must do it through a Medicare for all single-payer program. And what that program understands, by the way, is that mental illness is an illness, and that anybody in this country who is dealing with mental illness has the right to go to get the help they need and get it now without having to take out their wallet not 6 months from now. So we think, so we got a whole sweeping program in healthcare, in education, and in many other areas that I think would go a long way to improving life for those people with disabilities. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to grab the mic before you sit. Thank you very much. You touched on almost every one of the subjects. So
Should I go home now? No. All right.
So now that just means we get to go to the next level, right? Okay.
Now you asked me the hard question.
Now I'm going to ask you the hard questions. Okay. So the IDEA was passed in 1975.
Yep.
Congress pledged to finance 40%
Yep.
of the differential cost. You alluded to the fact that these are not fully funded programs.
Yep.
Okay. Children with disabilities, especially those who are also people of color, often have unequal access to educational resources despite the law guaranteeing such access. What specifically will your administration do to change this?
You're right. Congress promised way back when to fund IDEA at 40%. We're going to fund it at 50%. Second of all, there are many school districts throughout this country where we have low-income kids who are not getting, in any way, shape, or form, the education they need. I was in Detroit, of one of many school districts around this country where kids don't even have textbooks in many of the classes that they go. And that is why we're going to triple funding for Title I schools. And that is why we're going to treat teachers with the respect and dignity their enormously important work requires, deserves. That includes special ed teachers. And my view is, and we will fight to make sure, that no teacher in America earns less than $60,000 a year. If you take a deep breath, you see, and one of the things we're trying to do in this campaign is to kind of change our value systems. We pay baseball players and football players tens of millions of dollars a year, but you got teachers who are working 2 or 3 jobs. You got teachers who are taking money out of their own pockets to buy school supplies. Well, I get tired of hearing politicians tell us that they love the children of this country, but they don't love education and they don't love our teachers. So we got to change our priorities, make teaching a job that young people want to go into, appreciate, attract the best and the brightest into special education, and make sure they have the respect and the compensation that they deserve.
The majority of the United States citizens have their essential needs met: housing, food, water, rest, and a basic
I would
level of
respectfully
security.
disagree with that.
Okay. Unfortunately, individuals with disabilities and other minorities are still fighting for these basic needs. For if they were met, we could be productive and maybe even less costly for the government in many ways. 29 years after the ADA and 20 years after the Supreme Court Olmstead decision, it almost feels unreal that many Iowans on Medicaid who rely on broken long-term support services are struggling to stay physically and mentally healthy in their homes and actually having to consider moving into nursing homes due to discriminatory policies and a shortage of caregivers. People with disabilities are dependent upon finding in-home health care in order to avoid being placed in a group home or assisted living or nursing home. What will your administration do to ensure that someone with a disability is not forced out of their home in order to procure daily health care?
You are seeing right now, I'm going to take more than 2 minutes, you'll forgive me. You are seeing on your television screens right now in Iowa, and it'll be all over the country, TV ads talking about how terrible Medicare for all is. Do you know who's paying for those ads? Anyone know? Pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies. All right? Now, the reason I disagreed with you on the first part is even before we get to people with disabilities. Let's understand that in America today, understand a few things. We pay the highest prices in the world for our health care double the cost in any other country. You all know that? We spend $11,000 a year per person, more than double what they spend in Canada and other industrialized nations. Meanwhile, somehow, those countries guarantee health care to all of their people. You end up in the hospital in Canada for a month. Do you know what your bill is when you get out? Zero. Now, how do they do that? Well, they do it because their system and the system in Germany and the UK and Sweden and France and Germany, those systems are not run to profit the drug companies and the insurance companies. They're designed to provide quality care to all people. So, first point, we're going to pass Medicare for all. It means no premiums. Got it? You're not paying any premiums. No co-payments. No deductibles. No out-of-pocket expenses. You go to any doctor you want. Anybody. People with disabilities. People who are dealing with mental issues. Anybody goes to any doctor they want, gets the help they need. They do not have to take out their wallets. And we do that over a 4-year phase-in period. Right now, you're eligible for Medicare at 65. We go down to 55, then 45, 35. We cover the whole country. Healthcare is a human right. And what that means for people with disabilities, it means access to healthcare in a way that by no means exists today. Second of all, in terms of home health care, guess what? Medicare for all provides, finally, home health care. It is insane. It is insane. It is inefficient. It is wasteful of money to tell people, oh, you cannot stay in your home. We can't help you in your home. We're going to force you out of your home into a nursing home where you don't want to go at much greater expense. That make any sense to anybody? I don't think so. Furthermore, on the Medicare for all, we're finally going to provide hearing aids to people. We're going to provide dental care to people. We're going to provide eyeglasses to people. In other words, we are going to provide comprehensive care, including home health care. And we're going to do that. We're going to save the average person substantial sums of money in providing that care because the insurance companies and the drug companies will not be making huge profits, and we will not have an administrative nightmare right now in terms of what the insurance industry presents to us.
Thank you. So this is a two-part question. People with disabilities who are working earn less than 2/3 of the median wages earned by people without disabilities with similar education levels. Are you committed to supporting competitive integrated employment? Will you support legislation such as the Transformation to Competitive Employment Act? And finally, have you given consideration to how businesses could be incentivized to employ people with disabilities by paying adequate wages?
Well, I happen to think that the federal minimum wage today, which I think is the minimum wage here in Iowa, is that right? 7.25, is it? You know what? Don't want to get you too nervous. It's a starvation wage. Nobody can live on that. And that is why I have led the fight in the United States Senate to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour. And you know what? That applies to everybody. It applies to everybody. People with disabilities, people without disabilities. Your question is, how do we incentivize folks who, small, medium-sized businesses, how do we incentivize them? And we do that because we understand that not only for the person with the disability, but for society as well. It is important and a good idea for that person to have a meaningful, productive life. So it is worth, I'd rather give subsidies to small businesses to help hire people with disabilities than tax breaks to billionaires who don't need them.
The ADA's integration mandate and Supreme Court's Olmstead decision provided people with disabilities with critically important rights to live, work, and receive services in the most integrated setting appropriate. These rights have enabled tens of thousands of people with disabilities to move from institutions into their own homes. The lack of affordable, accessible housing has taken a toll on the lives of people with disabilities who continue to not have a choice in where they live and then are forced into nursing homes, psychiatric hospitals, board and care homes, and other institutions.
What about jails?
And jails too. So, thank you, Adam. What steps would your administration take to address this crisis?
You ready for a radical thought? All right. Don't collapse on me here. Here it comes. Mental illness and addiction should not be considered criminal activities. And the gentleman here, Adam is your name? Yeah, is absolutely right. I mean, we're talking about the need for radical changes in the way our society works. Does anybody in a million years think that jails should be the major repository, the major area where people with addiction and mental illness end up? That is insane. Well, I shouldn't, it's the wrong word to use, I guess, in that context. But that is absurd, all right? Jails have a purpose, and I want to make sure we end mass incarceration. But certainly people who are struggling with addiction, struggling with mental illness, they need the counseling that will improve their lives. Jails are not the institutions to provide those that kind of help. So what we are talking about here, getting back to your original question, is we have a major housing crisis in this country. And I don't have the percentage, somebody here may know it, of the percentage of folks who are sleeping out on the street tonight, 500,000 Americans, what percentage are dealing with mental illness? Anyone know that? Yeah.
It's something like, I think, 80%.
Well, I don't know what the number is, but that's a lot of people. And it is a absolute disgrace that in the richest country on earth, 500,000 people sleep out on the streets tonight. 30%? Okay, that's a lot of people. So what we need to do is put millions of people to work building the low-income and affordable housing, housing for people with special needs that this country absolutely requires. So we have introduced, I think, the most comprehensive housing plan ever introduced, to be honest with you. It's going to be an expensive plan, but we have a housing crisis for people with disabilities, and by the way, for people who do not have disabilities. You've got 19 million people paying 50% or more of their incomes on housing. That makes sense to anybody? All right, so we're going to build the housing that we need and provide the social services that people with disabilities desperately need.
Thank you. So climate change is intensifying the frequency and duration of disasters around the world, including the United States. In 2017 and 2018, the U.S. experienced 122 major disasters. People with disabilities and other adults and older adults are disproportionately affected. I lost it. They're disproportionately affected. I'd like to know what specific steps that you will take to ensure that we are involved in the readiness, the preparation, and the recovery process of any natural disaster that occurs.
Well, let me answer that question in a couple of ways. Before we talk about the need, absolutely, to involve people going to be impacted by a disaster, let's talk about trying to prevent future disasters. So let me be very clear about this one. We got a president who thinks that climate change is a hoax. This president is dangerously, dangerously wrong. Climate change is an enormous threat, not only to our country, but to the entire world. Now, I get criticized a lot for a lot of things. And I've recently been criticized a whole lot because I proposed the most comprehensive climate change plan ever ever introduced. $16 trillion. All right? Now, I want you all to think that when the scientists are telling us that if we don't act boldly to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, that what will happen is we are going to have a planet that is increasingly unhealthy and uninhabitable for future generations. In other words, we are fighting literally for the future of this planet. Now, how much should we spend to make sure that our kids and grandchildren have a planet? Anyone got a number? I think we got to spend everything we need to spend to make sure that this planet is habitable. And that is why I support the Green New Deal. And the author of the House Plan, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is going to be with me in Iowa next weekend to talk about the Green New Deal. Now, that was a long introduction to get to your question. Obviously, we're going to be looking at more floods, more droughts, more extreme weather disturbances. Generally speaking, those will always impact lower income people and people who are unable to take care of themselves. Wealthy people always do quite well. All right? And of course, and in our legislation, we provide tens of billions of dollars to protect the most vulnerable people in this country, poor people, people of color, people who live in areas that will be hard hit. We will involve them in the process, and we are providing the funding to do everything that we can to protect them when these events take place.
At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Cindy Hanawalt. She's the immediate past president of the Lynn County Medical Society.
Hello, thanks for coming. Well, I'm going to take a deep breath after we've been talking most of the morning about Medicare and Medicaid services. We've been talking about reimbursements. We've been talking about gaps in coverages. We've been talking about how even though individuals have a health care policy, they don't always have access to care because of reimbursement issues. And you come on stage, Senator Sanders, today, and honestly, as a provider, I thought maybe this was a little piece of heaven, because this would be amazing in my practice and in the practice of many of my colleagues, that if we could do the right thing every time for our patients, if I could give them the right medicine at the right time, the right home products, that right home services, wouldn't my job be a lot easier? So then it really just comes down to knowing the diagnosis, knowing the differential, getting the tests that I need at the time that I want it. And your campaign actually had asked for my bio and my CV, so I'm going to give you that. As you look at
She
that,
wants a job as Secretary of Health. I can
I
see
do.
that right here.
no, I give you that because I'm going to step on a limb here a little bit, and I am a little nervous. This is new for me. I do not have an economics background. I have a passion for healthcare cost containment, and I have a passion for caring for patients. What you're saying sounds like a godsend. However, I have been practicing long enough to know when my reimbursement is low, and Medicare has done that, particularly for the state of Iowa, in order for me to pay my staff and to cover the cost of medicines that I want to deliver in my practice and some of the cares, I have to see more patients then. You have to make up the difference somewhere. And so I pose that question to you. Really, what does Medicare for All really mean when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of the delivering when the reimbursement is low? How, as practitioners, are we going to keep our doors open and our rural hospitals open?
Right now, I don't know about I should know this, and I don't. Have you lost rural hospitals here?
Yes, we're
Okay.
17% right now are at risk of closing because of reimbursement.
Okay. Number one, the function, and Cindy, dialogue with me here. You may know more about this than I do, but when we talk about Medicare for All, one of the ways that we can make enormous savings is not only ending the profiteering of the drug companies and the insurance companies. Have you ever written out a prescription for a patient who could not afford to fill that prescription?
Well, sadly, weekly, yes. This
Okay.
happens every day in our
All right.
practices.
All right. So the first thing we do in that regard, just to tell you a story, A couple of months ago, I went from the Midwest into Canada to buy insulin. Do you have diabetic patients?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you know what the price of insulin in Canada, I'm talking about the same product from the same company, is compared to the United States?
Much lower.
Much lower? It is 1/10 the price. How's that? Much lower? You are aware that we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford the medicine their doctors prescribe. The pharmaceutical industry, and I want to get you all very nervous, engages in massive amounts of price fixing and collusion. They have enormous political power, having spent billions of dollars in lobbying and campaign contributions. So to a large degree, they own the U.S. Congress. And then they have money left over to advertise on Iowa radio and television to tell you how bad Medicare for all is, because we threaten their profits. So, number one, we will substantially lower the cost of prescription drugs because Medicare will negotiate prices. We will find out what the rest of the world is paying for a medicine and tell the drug companies they're not going to charge us more. And if worse comes to worse, we're going to make it legal for people to buy, for you, to get medicine from Canada, so the insulin you'll be able to give your patient will be 1/10 the price. The result of that is on the Medicare for all, we will be able to provide, make sure that everybody in America can get all the prescription drugs they need and not spend more than $200 a year. That is not pie in the sky. That is what we can do. Second of all, you tell me, I'm going to yield you some of my time that I don't have. We say this in the Senate. I yield to the gentle lady some time here. How much time does your office spend filling out forms and arguing with the insurance industry?
A third of our day at times.
Okay, that's gone. All right. And again, I know sometimes what I'm telling you is not something that I invented in the middle of the night. This exists in Canada, exists in other countries in the world. What would your life be like if Mrs. Jones came into your office, said hello, and you treated her? She didn't have to fill out any forms.
It would be great, but I also want to spend more than 10 minutes with her. I don't want to run people through, and I want to sacrifice that.
Right, and under Medicare for all, you would not spend 10 minutes. You would have, in fact, the freedom to practice medicine and not have to argue with the insurance companies about what type of therapy your patient needs. So I believe very strongly that it should be the doctors that you go to, freedom of choice. You want to go to her, you go to her. And she determines your therapy, not some bureaucrat sitting in an insurance company.
All right, I'm going to, I know Senator Hoag's going to kill me, but I just have one more piece of this, Senator Sanders. So when you talk about how we're going to decrease the cost of prescriptions,
yes,
we are seeing infectious disease is going to be the leading killer among us. We don't have antibiotics right now that are fighting all the things that we need it to do. If we take away some of that profit and some of the incentive with our pharmaceutical companies, my fear is that how are we going to have the innovations to do what we need to do in medicine?
That's the line of the pharmaceutical industry. That's just not true. They will have, no one is against a company, the drug companies do enormously important work. But as you may or may not know, they spend a hell of a lot more money in advertising and coming up with what we call Me Too drugs, changing the color of the pill, than they do in the research and development we need for cancer, diabetes, and other serious illnesses. So nobody will disincentivize the need to develop new drugs. That is a major, major priority. But on the other hand, if I say to you that at a time when so many of our people cannot afford to buy the medicine you prescribe, the drug companies last year made $69 billion in profit. Their CEOs get millions and millions and millions of dollars in compensation. All right, I know these guys. I have worked with them, worked against them, I should say. And right now, I don't have to tell you about the opioid epidemic, that they are being sued for tens of billions of dollars for killing thousands of Americans for selling a product that they knew was addictive. These are not nice guys, all right? And we need an industry, none more important, that says our job is to come up with the medications, with the drugs that can help us with cancer, with heart disease, with all the other terrible illnesses out there, not simply to make as much money as they can in any way that they can. That's an issue I feel very strong about.
All right, thank you. We're end of questioning. If you have any final remarks, go ahead and take this opportunity.
Well, I've gone over my time on every question already, so look, as I think you've heard, whether it's the issue of health care, whether it's the issue of housing, whether it's the issue of disability rights in general. We need to fundamentally change our national priorities. We don't need to be living in a country where 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of America, and then many of these people on top pay virtually nothing, or their companies pay virtually nothing in federal taxes, because we have a corrupt political system that they largely control. So what our campaign is about, I don't want to get you too nervous, because I want you to vote for me. But our campaign is about a political revolution. It is about the idea, radical though it may seem, that maybe we should have an economy and a government that works for ordinary Americans and not just the 1%. So I want to conclude by thanking all of you very sincerely. You are standing up for people who in many, many ways have been discarded, pushed aside. And again, you should be grateful that Tom Harkin has helped lead us to protect the people with disabilities. But we have an enormous way to go. And we need to create a society where nobody is left out, where people are not sleeping out in the street, where people with mental illness are not getting the care they need, where people with disabilities are not getting the housing that they need. This is the richest country in the history of the world. We've got to get our priorities right and create a government that works for all of us, not just wealthy campaign contributors. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. We have just about 5 minutes, and then we will bring our next speaker on. So, Senator Sanders, if you want to come this way.